Bartholomew Leeds hung from the roof beam that ran the length of the cockloft. He seemed asleep, with his head bowed, his eyes closed and his hands dangling limply at his sides. Thomas Clarady blinked twice, then squeezed his eyes shut and popped them open, hoping to clear the trick of the light creating this illusion. There must be a stool beneath Leeds' feet, supporting him. But who could sleep standing on a stool? Tom took a few reluctant steps forward from where he had abruptly stopped. He'd been in a hurry and made it halfway across the long room before spotting the man hanging between the curtained bedsteads. 3 beds stood crosswise in a row down the center of the loft, where the roof was highest. One near the stairwell for the younger boys, Leeds' grander one in the middle, and the one Tom shared by the far wall. Leeds was hanging between the last 2. Tom had just dashed up to get some money from the box under his bed to pay the carrier to deliver his letter. That's why he'd skipped out of the sermon early. He'd forgotten to fill his purse. The carrier left promptly at 9, and Tom's report was overdue as it was. He was supposed to write daily, detailing his observations of the events in the college. Well, now his report would be even later. He wondered how his spymaster, Francis Bacon, would receive the news that yet another of Tom's tutors had died unexpectedly. Cold air struck at his cheeks. The small windows set into the eaves on each long side of the loft were wide open, letting in a breeze fresh with the earthy smells of the greening fields east of the college. Spring was awakening in Cambridge, and for a mercy, it wasn't raining. The sky beyond Leeds' slender figure was a perfect blue. A blackbird on a nearby ledge vigorously declared his melodious philosophy to the breeze. How could anyone destroy himself on such a beautiful March morning? Leeds hung perfectly still, his slipper-clad toes pointed downward, 2 feet above the floor. The hem of his black gown fluttered about his bare ankles. Now Tom spotted the stool, lying on its side against the bed, where it must have rolled when Leeds kicked it over. This was not a good development. Tom's masters would not be pleased. How could such a thing have happened with no warning whatsoever? He'd seen the man only that morning when Leeds roused them for 5 o'clock chapel. Sleepy-eyed by candlelight, he had seemed his usual self. Leeds was always dapper and correct, even before sunrise. He'd been dark of complexion and had cultivated a vaguely Italianate air, but more in the way of a scholarly curate than a melancholy man. Though Tom knew little about his humours, Leeds had avoided him as much as possible, given that they occupied the same set of chambers along with 3 other students. He'd checked Tom's work in a cursory fashion and sent him off to junior fellows for further instruction. Tom knew why, or guessed. Leeds had been having second thoughts about his letter to Lord Burleigh. That was as plain as a poor man's cuffs. He'd written to warn his lordship about rising rebelliousness among the Puritan Protestants in the Cambridge area. They were planning to hold a secret meeting, a synod, under cover of commencement in July. One influential zealot was pushing an extreme agenda. There was even talk of separating from the established church by means of violence. Tom had been set to worm his way into the confidence of the Puritan community in Cambridge in order to identify that zealous leader. That was why he was here, living in Leeds' chambers as an ordinary paying student. By the time he arrived, however, Leeds had obviously begun to regret sending that warning. Tom didn't mind. He could be patient. He would go about his daily round, studying toward his bachelor's degree, until time and the Clarady charm worked their customary magic. Leeds would come around in a month or 2, remember why he'd written that letter in the first place, and give Tom at least a nudge in the right direction. What would become of Tom's commission now? Would he be called back? A failure? He wished that damned bird would stop its noise so he could think. He needed to have his wits about him. This wasn't the first corpus he'd discovered, sad to say.